Hey everyone, welcome back to the Bury Me in Starfields Behind the Scenes Monday Update podcast version. This one's number 13, update number 13, and dated 8/22/22, entitled Panels Everywhere. So, how were all your weeks? Mine was ultimately really good. It started out a bit rocky. Some of those fears and stresses that I addressed last week continued out throughout a good portion of the week. But I pulled through the weeds over the weekend, and now we're cooking with gas, as they say. As I mentioned, the beginning of the week was more of the same slog that I had been dealing with on that first page. I finally finished it. But finishing the colors and scripting it and then lettering it, especially the scripting and lettering, continued the trend of steeper than expected learning curves. The scripting and editing of the script was like kind of a continuous process, so I'm not entirely sure how many versions of that I went through before I landed on the final version. But there were at least 2 distinct lettering passes and then like a lot of tweaking. And so I'm really happy with the final product on that first page, but I definitely learned some things going through that process, and I'll talk more about those sort of teachable moments in a second. But finishing up that first page really seemed to, pull out some of the speed bumps, if you will. And so I got down to, nailing down the final version of the story and laying out the rest of the pages. So I did finally land on the final version of the story, for better or for worse. And there are so many pages with so many panels. Well, I say that. There are 75 panels over 12. Yeah, now it's 12 pages. For an average of 6 per page, which is actually pretty standard. But there are a few that are very panel dense. One with 11 panels, which is a little crazy, but I just kind of love really panel dense pages. It's just a thing that I like. I know that there's like this trend for like the last 20 or 30 years towards, like fewer and fewer panels and trying to combine like everything into like one panel and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know, man. I just kind of love sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, having pages that just have a shit ton of panels on them, I don't know, it makes me happy. Especially when the pages are really heavily, sort of talky talk, it allows for more acting. You can get different facial expressions, and you can like add in like a silent beat here. And so that's the kind of stuff that I really like to do sometimes, when it's called for, not all the time. And this is another instance of me going, normal comic artists just don't do this, or try not to do this. But this is my book, and I like it, so yeah. So there are a lot of panels. It's also a way of just freaking cramming story into a limited space, like a lot of story into a limited space. I mean, this thing is already ballooned to 12 pages from 4. Well, I mean, it's 11 pages of art, but because I'm kind of cheating with one page, just get the pagination right. And yes, I could take 5 or 6 panels from that 11 panel page and just make 2 normal pages, but I like the crazy panel page. But yeah, anyway, so it's 12 pages now, and I could honestly probably expand the story out to a full 20 to 22 page count book and make this like issue 0 in the first full issue of the comic, because I'm leaving just a ton of ideas on the table here, but I'm already spending way more time and energy on this nonsense lark of a story than I'd planned on. And so we're coming up on one of the tenets of making comics, which is sometimes you need to just call it finished and move on. So we're calling it finished from a writing standpoint anyway, and moving on. And I'm happy with where it's at. I'm looking forward to getting some feedback when it's out, about things that move slowly or things that people think I should have spent more time on. I'm fully aware that I'm an untested writer at this point, and even more untested editor, especially of my own work. So I'm going to have some things that I need to hear and that I'm looking forward to hearing. But I'm happy with where it's at right now. It's definitely going to be something that I'm going to be proud of and ready to present to the public, knowing that there's going to be some criticism coming back my way, but that's going to happen. It's going to happen even when you're like fully seasoned, you know what I mean? So I'm not really that worried about that. I'm actually looking forward to that, because the point of these shorts is to get my feet wet and get some experience under me before I start in with the like actual comics, So in terms of things that I learned from that first page, though, I am implementing one of the things that I thought about doing on that page, which is to script and letter the pages over the rough layouts before I start actually drawing and coloring them. And that's for a few reasons. The first being so that I'll know what kind of room I need for the dialogue, so that I can plan the panels more efficiently before I start really drawing. So I'm not drawing a bunch of stuff that's just going to get covered up by text, and word balloons. And like knowing what I need to draw and what I can fudge, And this is something I would highly recommend any comic book artist that hasn't already done something like that to do. Go ahead and do something like that. I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise that the lettering is an integral part of the art. And comic artists should be drawing their panels with the lettering in mind already. But as I've mentioned in past updates, intellectual knowledge is a poor substitute for practical application. I mean, like, you can theoretically know that I need to leave room for dialogue and think that you've done a good job. And then when you actually get into actually lettering it, or your letterer gets into actually lettering it, they have like huge headaches trying to figure out, where to exactly to put these huge word balloons. So it's definitely something that I'd recommend doing. I mean, back in the old days, it was a lot harder to letter your pages. Like, hand lettering is a full-on other skill that, usually a comic book artist or an inker just won't have. How big are the letters? Like, how much room do you really need for the balloons? And I mean, that's not to diminish the talents of today's computer letterers at all. But if you're putting together your comics on a computer or an iPad, like, it's not hard, and there's really no excuse to at least do a cursory pass of the lettering over your like roughs, so that you know exactly what kind of room you need, or at least a close approximation, because like you can go in and it's not hard to lay in lettering in today's with today's computer apps. Like if you're using Clip Studio Paint, it's dead easy, to just throw in some lettering. And I mean, like, companies like Comcraft and Blambot have free fonts that you can use, at least for like practice purposes, you know what I mean, to get an idea of like what kind of room you need for these dialogue heavy giant word balloons that I apparently specialize in. And so you're not drawing a bunch of stuff that you don't need, and or you're drawing and laying out the panels in such a way that important stuff isn't getting covered up. And and that's, at the very least, you're minimizing the pain that you're passing on to your letterers. And in my case, we're trying to save as much time as possible, thinking in terms of like watching the budget. Like if you think about making a movie, I've said this before, time is money. I may not be paying for this. I might be able to do whatever I want, from a money standpoint, because I don't have to pay for special effects or whatever. trade-off is time. How long is it going to take you to get this stuff done? And so and especially in a situation like mine where I'm trying to do everything myself, you really need to watch that time budget. And so for me, it's absolutely essential, I found, to have at least a first pass of the lettering down so that I'm not spending a shit ton of time drawing things that will be covered up by word balloons, or worse, spending a long time trying to finagle the lettering into panels where I thought I'd left enough room. But the reality just turns out to be different. And that's what happened on this first page. Like I thought I went into it with clear eyes on like what I was going to, where I wanted the dialogue to be, where I wanted the panels to be, and a definite hardcore plan. And then I got into actually lettering the thing and actually scripting the thing and adding script, adding dialogue, as I'm on the fly. And all of a sudden the balloons aren't quite where I wanted them to be. And I'm like doing a lot of, finagling, to use that word again, to try and get things to fit right and not cover up important stuff and not make it look like it's just busy and crowded. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure that I succeeded, but yeah, we'll see. And, speaking of saving time and watching the time budget, a while ago I made up my own custom font to use on my comic, but at least for now, that's unusable. So I had to revert back to some of the Comicraft fonts that I've purchased in the past. I wanted this book to be me from top to bottom, from the art to the lettering to the writing, everything. But lettering that first page, my goodness, there's going to be a lot of manual kerning on that page. And if you're not familiar with lettering, you may not be familiar with the term kerning, but that basically is just meaning the space between the letters. There's a art to it, there has to be a certain amount of space. Too little and it looks crowded, too much and it looks like a separate, like the word doesn't fit, it just doesn't look right. It makes it really difficult to read. And so there's going to be a lot of manual kerning on that page for my font, because I'm not a professional font maker, and I haven't dialed it in right to where I can just type in the letters and have them look right. Time is my budget, and that shit is way too expensive. I just don't have time. It was going to be like every single letter I was going to have to kern, and there's just not enough time. I mean, this thing is already taking me more time than I had thought it was going to in the first place. So I have to find ways to cut costs. And this is one of them, especially when I've already paid actual money, like actual cash, for professional fonts that quote unquote just work and look beautiful, So Comicraft fonts it will be until and if I can get my custom font to not be a little bitch. That's to be determined. It's a work in progress, in a spot where my buddy Gene, who used to work for Wildstorm in their production department, can hopefully come in with a helping hand. We'll see. It may just be that it's not worth it. If you've got professional fonts out there available like Comicraft and Blambot, it really just doesn't make a lot of sense not to go ahead and make use of them. So, fork out the $30 to $70 or whatever to get a nice font pack, and just don't worry about it from there. Just let them do their work and pay them for their work, and then move on. So starting out week 14, that's where we're at. I've got the final 11 pages roughly laid out. The overall writing is done, last-minute edits notwithstanding. And I'm in the process of scripting and lettering the pages, which hopefully will be finished today, fingers crossed. And then I'm on to finishing up the art and buttoning this thing up. And in terms of release, I'm still not really comfortable putting out a hard release date. But I may try out my initial release plan of releasing 5 pages, in this case 6 pages, in 2-week intervals. So The first part of this story may drop as early as next Monday, maybe, we'll see, with the second half dropping 2 weeks later. But that all is to be determined because I still don't have a full grasp on how long it's going to take to finish these pages. I'm still kind of learning on the job, if you know what I mean, like from the coloring and final editing standpoint. And unlike the stories that I've plotted out with that release schedule in mind, this one doesn't have a really satisfying break point for me to, it does have a break point at the 6-page mark, but I don't know if it's satisfying. I don't know if it's something that I really want to break up. This one's kind of like you kind of just need to steamroll through it, so I'm still not sure if I want to break it up, but I might. And then C, I'm still thinking in terms of having pages quote unquote in the can before I start releasing any. I'd like when I start releasing pages for there to be, little to no gaps in release. But these shorts are kind of like bonuses or teasers, so they don't really factor into the proper release scheme that I've got. And I have the looming process of partnering with Publisher X for a print first publication run, so that proper release scheme may be going out the window anyway. So I've got a lot to think about, but for now the immediate path is clear. Finish up this short, so that's what I'm going to go get back to. And I think that does it for this week. A shorter one, but I'm kind of fired up, and I'm like, I'm really, like I said at the top, I'm cooking with gas on this. I'm like really making a lot of, good headway. And so like, I kind of don't want to spend a shit ton of time on an update when I could be working on the actual comics. So with that, thank you so much for being here, so much for listening, and have great weeks. And I'll see you back here next Monday. Okay. See ya. Bye.